Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one is going to be for K111, episode 11 of Book 1 Air, Skeletons in the Closet. Another very strong episode. I don't think it's quite as good as like episode 8 or episode 10, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in this episode, and I would definitely cite this episode as having probably one of the best, like, 7-minute, like, third of an episode sequences in, I think, all of, like, the franchise. It includes Avatar, that includes Korra. That's obviously the Amon Tarlok backstory, I think, is just a masterpiece of just devoting 7 minutes of an episode to revealing this really important thing. You have to get this right. You have to give it the depth and revelation that it needs, and they got it right. That, I suppose, plus the big battle of UA Bay here that we get between the United Forces and Amon, Hiroshi's forces, the Equalists. It makes for, I think, a solid episode. I think it's just that the other, like, 14 or so minutes of the episode aren't quite on the level of the other 7, and perhaps don't match up against maybe sequences from some of the other stronger episodes, like episode 8, which is like a, just from start to end, just a really amazing episode. Same with episode 10. This one, I think there are just a couple of points where it's not quite as good because they're building towards the finale. But let's get into talking about this. We'll keep the big stuff until the end, the flashback, and focus on the other stuff before then. Let's, I suppose, start off with the fact that basically our heroes are hiding out with Gamu underground, and we met him from the first episode. He's the bush hobo guy, sparkly bush guy, as we kind of called him before we knew his name. And we see that they're kind of living down with him. It's benders and non-benders living together, and it sort of solves the problem in a way that, like, it's not that there's this, like, inherent benders can't live with non-benders. It's just all about, like, of course there's our always criminal elements to anything, and that's what causes the issue. But, you know, Gamu sort of represents this like, leader of this sort of community here that's actually working together for this, and they're in not the best position. It's kind of why when we sort of knew that when they teased book 2 as having, like, there's going to be a new president for the city, a lot of people were kind of like, Gamu, look what he's already managed to do just on his own, why not him? He seems to represent everything we kind of need going into the next book. But we see Hiroshi give his speech at the start, and, you know, it's the equalist speech. I think it sort of points out perhaps Hiroshi could have used a little bit of backstory with the death of Yasuko, Asami's mother. That should have, I think, at some point been shown over the course of the series to explain the shift in Hiroshi's character. Like, this episode explains basically Amon and how, okay, he's a bender, but how does he go from being a bender to actually being the leader of an anti-bender kind of movement? Hiroshi is similarly, I think, needed something like that, of like, okay, I get it, he's a non-bender, but he's a very successful non-bender in a city that is kind of, I suppose, dominated by benders. So he himself, obviously, like, he must acknowledge the hard work that he had to get there, but wouldn't inherently have any reason to just hate all benders, and how the death of his wife at the hands of benders led him down this road. That's something I think you needed to explore why he never, as I discussed in the episode 7 review, why he never tried to, I suppose, brainwash Asami. That's actually a very notable thing for him. Why he decided to basically keep his true feelings about benders hidden from Asami, and then last minute when it came out, then tried to convince her when he wasn't sure of what her own opinions on kind of benders and non-benders are. It's stuff like that I really want to know, and it points out perhaps the only thing that this flashback doesn't really cover is, when do Amon and Hiroshi meet up, and how exactly does the Equalist movement form? Is it primarily Hiroshi's idea, because he's the one obviously supplying most of the, like, funding towards it, or is more of it from Amon as kind of, I suppose, having more of the ideal and really being against Benders from kind of a slightly different position. That's, I suppose, part of the big discussion there. But that's something that we still, still can be answered. Like, it's not that there's no reason for why that story can never be told. It's just, a matter of finding the correct place to tell that story. I think you can characterize Asami well through that story, Hiroshi well, finally getting to know Yasuko as a character. It's a way to, I suppose, tell more of Amon's story if you really want to, cover what he did between leaving at the end of this flashback from this episode, right up until basically where we are in book one and the Equalist movement making its a big move to become a power within the city. Those are the sort of things that I'd really like to see, because you see that this is the episode where Hiroshi really kind of steps up and is like the second in command basically of the Equalist. He's giving a speech to all of the followers. He leads the kind of biplane attack and so on. You sort of you see the commitment to the cause from Hiroshi in this episode and how high up he is. I'd like an explanation, I think, a little bit more about that, especially given that you're going to have Asami's arc revolve quite heavily around her relationship with her father in book one and also in book four. But we'll progress. The next bit, I suppose, is like Mako and Korra have a very nice scene kind of sitting down next to Naga, and it's a scene to just show that if not for like Asami kind of coming in and the relationship drama stuff happening, very clearly these two would have become a couple over time, because you can see the relationship that they have and that they get on very well and kind of immediately sort of understand and can relate to each other. And you can see the chemistry there, the romantic chemistry that's developing. But as we see between the two of them, they back off from having like a sort of kiss scene at this point in time, because Asami is a factor in all of this and there's different things to focus on, which I suppose leads to the arrival of General Iroh and just the obliteration of the United Forces because of the planning and machinery of the Equalists. Immediately there's mines in the water, which the United Forces seem to be able to deal with, but not at the same time as they're dealing with these high-speed biplanes, which is it's meant to be obviously this huge technological advancement of like, before this they're used to all flying machines basically being small kind of balloons, war balloons, or fairly slow airships that, while are powerful, perhaps well armored, hard to take down, but are slow targets. And all of a sudden you have these high-speed, maneuverable, quick, but also powerful, speedy planes that are kind of coming in, and they can't touch them because they're benders firing from ships, they're firing, they're bending through like cannons. They can't get anywhere near these things, basically, apart from getting some lucky hits, basically. That's what's really interesting to kind of look at over the course of this episode, is just to kind of see the advanced technology that the Equalists have compared to the United Forces, which probably have the widest available technology that's widely available to the world, but they're lacking the absolute high-end stuff that like Hiroshi has. And that's clear to see by just how badly they get defeated, and it's only the likes of I suppose a hero character like Iroh who's actually able to take down multiple biplanes at the same time. Korra decides that this is the point to enter the battle herself, and she gets a couple of nice hero moments. She gets a little bit of a sort of Avatar hero moment. She does the kind of water spout thing up in the air, deflects a few bombs, does a little bit of damage herself, but she quickly, I suppose, realizes that there's only so much she can do, and she's sort of a bit of a sitting duck. She doesn't quite have the maneuverability herself to actually take out these biplanes particularly easy herself. And so has to kind of just accept that saving Iroh is sort of like the main thing that she can do here, and hope that they can go somewhere from here. As for Iroh getting injured in this way, cool moment to just see him taking out those three planes basically, and then just fire punching that bomb at the end, but getting his like arm burned, and like Korra's healing it, and it's just like that's what it took to kind of take Iroh out of this fight. But it's this thing of like this was the hope for all of the benders. Like Tenzin called in the United Forces. This was going to be what turns the tides, and they were completely ready for them. So it's just this kind of desperate move of just the only way that they can progress from here is that Bumi's going to come in with the second wave of forces, Tenzin's brother, first mentioned, I suppose, pretty much. So they have to take out the biplanes at the source, wherever they kind of took off from, to get anywhere in this fight, to save Bumi from the same fate as Iroh's forces. And this is where they make their kind of, I suppose, final plan. And Korra decides that this is the point where she can't hide away any longer. She has to deal with Amon directly, because I suppose from her perspective, it's like, okay, we're in full-on war at this point in time. The only way any big move is really going to be made is if I manage to take out Amon, take out the head of the movement, and that should really, really turn the tides. And she's like, no, now is the time to do this. And you can tell that it's not just a sort of desperation move. She kind of is, she feels like she's ready to kind of confront him at this point. And maybe she doesn't know exactly what she's going to do, but she sort of knows that now is the right time. And this is where Mako steps up, and we get this, I suppose, in terms of the romance stuff, fairly important moment of everyone, I think, interprets just him deciding to go with Korra on this very personal mission for her as more or less, this is Mako realizing he cares for Korra more than basically anyone else. And this, combined with the scene that he has with Asami later on, together basically make up the breakup for Mako and Asami. And yes, it's not the most clear thing in the world, but given the way they've done romance here, this feels as good as a breakup. That, you know, you had them have a scene where they said goodbye to each other. You had the context of Asami seeing Mako and Korra's chemistry prior to this, and her reaction to, I suppose, Mako going with Korra. Made it clear that when there was this more serious moment here, this was the interpretation of it, that this is a breakup scene, but with the acknowledgement that basically they're always still going to care about each other, and that it's not that Mako just doesn't care about Asami anymore, it's just his realization that he actually cares about Korra that little bit more. And I think in that sense, it's a sort of interesting angle. This is where like the weakness of the romance angle comes out, in that they don't give it enough time, really. They, again, the excess focus on drama. When I think really if you were rewriting book one to kind of fix it in a way, you probably wouldn't have put Mako and Asami as a couple. Like, honestly, probably the way you probably should have done it is like have some sort of relationship drama. Like you do the kind of Bolin and Korra thing, and he kind of thinks it's a kind of relationship type thing, but it ends up not being. You have the Korra Mako kiss. Bolin is kind of heartbroken similarly, but then he's the one maybe to start a relationship with Asami and or something like that. Like, you don't have to have everyone just be in a relationship, but I think the Mako Asami relationship by the end of the show feels like the one thing that really didn't need to happen, like, at all. Admittedly, it's probably the only time we ever really see Mako and Asami interact is when basically there's kind of romance stuff going on. We get that in book 2 a little bit, and we get that here. They never interact really outside of their attempted romance bits in the show, which is very unfortunate in that, especially now, I don't know what their relationship really is outside of the fact that it's this group of friends and they're both in the group, in the friend group. I don't really necessarily know what their dynamic is as such, and that's just a weakness of the show, in that we didn't get a chance to see a lot of this because Asami isn't used all that much in the show in the grand scheme of things. But coming back to this specific scene, I don't really have too big of a problem with this being the breakup. As I said, it's a little vague, but from the context of everything else that's going on here, this is Mako sort of choosing Korra, and you know, to make that happen, he has to end the relationship with Asami, and it's basically with the situation. I think both parties get what's happening here. There's a reason Asami's going off with Bolin and Iroh and not with Mako and Korra, is that because this is a very like, I care about you a lot kind of situation where Mako feels he has to be there for Korra. In that we already saw how he reacted when she was taken away. He's not going to let her go into this other dangerous thing just on her own. And she appreciates that, and is, I suppose, the fact that she's willing to accept his help on this very kind of personal mission shows you how much she kind of cares about Mako, and that she's willing to let him, she kind of respects him enough to let him come with her, whereas usually like her pride at times might have gotten in the way, and she would have wanted to do it on her own. But you know, we get to see the goodbyes. You know, Bolin kind of caring about Korra as well, kind of saying, you know, like, Amon's a nasty dude, you know, watch out for yourself. And then Korra giving Naga over to Bolin for the mission. And the brothers kind of saying goodbye to each other was pretty sweet, and it's just a nice goodbye scene. And then Gamu says a pretty cool line as well. You know, good fortune and success to you, valiant heroes. Always a good line from the well-spoken hobo who lives underground. The mention of Boomy, I already talked about that. I suppose after that, it's basically just, you know, the start of the missions. You know, they're heading off to the airfield, and Mako and Korra are going to go undercover onto Air Temple Island to, you know, kind of infiltrate, see what's happening, get towards Amon. The lieutenant instructs them that there's like a rally taking place, but they have to kind of sort of get into the temple, see what's going on here. They eventually hide up in the attic because they're like, okay, Amon's going to come back because he's using the air temple as his like base of operations. And up in the attic when they're hiding, they come across Tarlok, which obviously, like, I don't think that in itself is a sort of surprise, because we know Amon took Tarlok off and was going to do something very specific with him, of like, I'll deal with him. So he's keeping him as a personal prisoner, but as they ask, you know, what makes you so special? This revelation is on the level of, you know, the ones we've had in previous episodes of Tarlok bloodbending, Amon coming in to take out Tarlok revealing here that Amon is his brother, and that Amon is a bloodbender, the waterbender, is a pretty big reveal. And that's, again, like the point of, I've brought up a lot of times about book one, of just, book one has these shocking revelations that very few of the other books have. I'd borderline say they don't have them, and book one is kind of the only place we really get them, because it has more of a mystery plot. Other than that, it's just sort of like, kind of, they all have their epic moments, but these kind of like shocking revelations of a mystery moment are very much kind of like an exclusive thing that book one has, with just how well crafted this story is, and how this, what we're about to get here, this 7 minutes of backstory, explains pretty perfectly basically why these revelations make sense, even if they're so shocking to us and we're kind of struggling to believe them. And again, like, getting into it, like, there's only so much praise I can give this, but as I said at the start, like, I think this is one of the best, you know, just sequences of the show. Just, they devote 7 full minutes, they write a big musical piece called Before, and it plays in full in the background while this whole thing is happening. They just tell you the story of Amon, Noatak, and Tarlok, as well as giving you extra backstory on Yukon as well. And it's a very tragic story as we get, and it becomes a sort of like theme for like the final couple of episodes of just Korra is going to have to bring an end to the, you know, the sad story of this family who have kind of caused chaos, even if 2 of the family didn't want to. But it's I like this story so much because it has a bit of everything. It starts out just kind of very, very nice and hopeful in a way, because this is Yukon truly making a second start. You get the sense that, okay, he's trying to get away from being like captured and going to prison and stuff like that, but it's still a case of like he tries to make a life for himself. He just goes to live up in the north. And it seems like he's just doing a kind of fairly mundane job. It's nothing fancy. He's not trying to live in wealth or anything like that. He seems like he leaves all the kind of bonuses from being a criminal sort of like behind him, and really just wants to have a simple life basically. And he obviously meets this woman, they have a family, and it's this sense of like it could have ended just there. He just has this family, and in the second half of his life, more or less, has really turned things around. There's no need for him to be this criminal and dominate at everything. There's something simple about not having bending and just enjoying his family. And that's definitely the impression that I get, because once obviously it's revealed that, you know, Amon is the older brother, Noah Talk's the older brother, then Tarlok is the younger one. Then they get into the fact that they're benders, and it changes, and you get this sense because they haven't focused on Yukon all that much, but just the fact that he started this relationship, has this family, it suddenly goes from, you know, the two brothers playing out in the snow and like their mother's happy, their father's happy, to suddenly he apparently just the second they become benders starts taking them out on these long trips away from the house, away from their mother, focusing completely on their training, being very strict about their training, and suddenly all of the stuff that he felt he sort of had to leave behind because he didn't have his bending, didn't have any power, he sort of feels like he can get that back through these two because they have the power. They have the same level of power, the same special psychic bloodbending that he had. What could he do by using these two? And suddenly the doubts, the like, I want revenge against the Avatar for what he did to me, stuff that he couldn't have possibly thought about before, suddenly becomes possible again. And he basically makes the mistake here of sacrificing this good life that he had here, and ruining the entire family. And that's the point that we get here. This is such a tragic tale because it is such a nice family. He'd got it back basically in his second life, but he ruined it all again in doing this. And like it's shocking in a way that like he just comes out and tells them, I was Yukon, this like legendary criminal within the city. The Avatar took my bending away, but I was one of the most powerful benders of all time, and you can be that way too. And especially when they get in, they become older, and he gets into the bloodbending training. It's suddenly there's this like dark, there's that horror kind of element from, you know, the original bloodbending episode, with Katara and Hama. That stuff comes into it as well, because now he's not just like forcing them to become good benders and is like doing all this training with them and so on, being harsh with them. He's now forcing them to use this sort of like very morally dubious kind of technique. Something that you are taking control of animals and later on people against their will. And for these people, for these kids who grow up for like the first, you know, couple of years of their life, just living a normal life, this is something that they can't just immediately adapt to. It's something that's hard to even comprehend that they have this ability, let alone actually just use it to kind of dominate the will of these animals. And you see Amon using it on the buffalo yak, Tarlok's forced to use it in all those kind of Arctic wolves, then Amon uses it. It's definitely kind of in a way hard to watch, because you see how they animate the wolves are just like terrified that they have no idea what's happening to them, whereas at least a human kind of gets that like they're being possessed in some way, whereas the wolves are just like I can't move all of a sudden, I'm hovering off the ground, like they just have no clue. And it's cruel, and they animate it that way. And especially when they get into, they have to use bloodbending on each other to, I suppose, I suppose basically to test how to use it against humans. Um, Tarlok immediately upon feeling it himself, what it's like to be bloodbend, basically says, I never want to bloodbend ever again because I don't want to do that to anyone or anything, knowing now how it felt. And you can see that he's a good person at heart. I think you get the sense, probably represents more of the ideals of their mother rather than Yukon. And especially when they get into, I suppose, why Amon ended up in the kind of position that he did, of like, Tarlok wasn't the most skilled. He had the powerful ability and the potential, but he could never quite live up to Yukon's expectations. His training never was completed, and in a way, Tarlok is weaker at kind of psychic bloodbending than Amon, in part because Amon was so advanced and Tarlok always fell behind, and so Yukon was only really focused on Amon. Amon was the star pupil, Noatok was the star pupil, because he was just a prodigy at the technique. And I think you definitely get the sense that Yukon sees himself in Noatok, that he either sees a higher potential for psychic bloodbending than even Yukon had back when he had his bending, or somewhere close to that, where this is the person that's really going to get me to where I need to be again. And I love how they kind of use Tarlok's kind of protest basically about this as a way to really sort of shift the focus with Amon, because it's a Tarlok focused backstory and Amon is just kind of like a player within it. And then suddenly the kind of shift comes in and it's like, but, you know, Amon suffered more than I did because he, in a way, took the pressure off me. I was always the failure. When he failed at something, he got it even worse than I did. And because of that, he had the higher expectations. He had more training to do. He had to learn things quicker. And he came to... It changed him, basically. His father being so harsh with them changed them. And I think part of also why it was such a big impact on both of them is that just them being benders basically changed their father. Their impressions of their father are different prior to them being benders than afterwards, because for them it's like this switch just happened and he went from being this, you know, their father who cared about them, they were allowed to have fun, to any spare time they have, they're going out on trips to the mountains, they're training, they're getting shouted at for doing things wrong, they have to forcibly bloodbend things and each other and so on. And it's you see that he's completely just using his kids as tools here. He doesn't really care about them or his family anymore. I think that's the big impression that you get here, is that their mother kind of becomes this forgotten part of the family. They probably keep up the act at home to keep it nice, but they're keeping so much from her. I'd love to get a little insight into how she felt as all of this was happening, because she's being left out of all of these trips that they're going on. And while maybe she thinks it's like bonding or something like that, she's not a bender, clearly. It's something that, you know, she can't really maybe participate in. There must be something within her that's kind of like, something's wrong here, like they're being kept out far too long. Like, Noatok's personality is changing, Tarlok's super timid, you know, my husband is completely different. And especially when they come back without Noatok that day, it's super, super tragic to think about, just that, what that was like, of just suddenly, I don't know if they reveal the full story to her or if they still keep it a secret, the whole psychic bloodbending thing and Yukon's past and so on. But like, what happened here? Did they just say that like he died on this exploration, or does the truth come out? Because Tarlok says Yukon never trained him after this point, so his training stopped here before he could move on to the psychic part of the bending. He that's why Tarlok still uses his hands. So I like that they incorporate that into it as well, and just how basically, with only Tarlok left, he stopped his training. He just saw the potential for his revenge just gone because his star pupil is gone. They say he died a few years later, and clearly it was just this super sad family after that because one son goes missing, father dies, I suppose, after like years of just kind of being this kind of completely different person, and it's like I actually like to know what Tarlok was doing all of this time. You sort of understand to a degree like where it happens. Like he tries to do things the right way. Why he becomes like a politician in Republic City. He tries to gain power the right way, but inevitably he sort of falls to, I suppose, the kind of like genetic weakness in a way of the family of like going too far in a quest for power, eventually making it some sort of a revenge plot against the Avatar, plot against the city. The same with Amon, even though he went about it so differently. And I love that with Amon, there's that moment of just like, like I was like I think Yukon basically says, like you have like one of the most powerful abilities. I had one of the most powerful abilities. But he just doesn't care because from his perspective, all he can think about is like his father doesn't have his bending. And the reason his father, despite being a very powerful bender in the past, doesn't have his bending is because the Avatar took it from him. So he's always interpreted the Avatar as being the most powerful person and the Avatar's ability to take bending away to be the most powerful thing. And so you immediately get this idea of that's where the idea for inventing an ability like that comes from, where he clearly did research with his bloodbending, knowing that he can manipulate basically what it is within someone that makes them able to bend. And because he can manipulate them on the inside with bloodbending, you could see how he could, like, over time research that to the point where he could cut off specific parts of people from within to stop them from being able to bend. I'd love to see how that process happened. I'd love to see where the idea for the mask came from, the backstory with the spirits and so on, when he met Hiroshi. But you immediately understand him. This is where his quest for the ability came from. This is where his hatred for bending came from, because bending ruined his life. That's his interpretation of it, that the second he and his brother were found out to be benders, it ruined their life because of their father. And he sees it as like, yes, it's an ability that I have that I'm going to use. I don't like it about myself, but I'm going to use it to get what I want and get rid of all other bending, so this never has to happen again. Of course, it's like hypocrisy, it's a contradiction that the leader of a non-bender organization is a bender, but from his perspective and how he feels about bending and what it did to him and his family, I suppose you do get where it comes from, why he feels so, passionately about this and so on. So I think that does a really good job at just, like, the backstory does a great job at explaining it. And immediately it just prompts the idea for them of like, okay, like we know he's a bender. Like that's the way to change all of this, where that the movement falls apart if the people who are part of the movement find out that it fundamentally is run by someone who is a bender, who's been lying to you this entire time about this. That just immediately destroys the movement. There's no real sense of like, oh, someone else will follow in and kind of keep it on. That is just such a devastating thing that it will just fall apart. What they don't really think about as much is how can they fully be believed? They obviously oppose the movement, so why would they believe like Korra and Mako doing all of this? And obviously they don't predict what he does in the next episode, but it's what they have to use, if at all possible. This is the one advantage they now have over Amon, is that they know who he is, but he doesn't know that they know this, and so they have that advantage. They have one thing they can use against him. How do they do it? So, as I said, amazing backstory. I love the music, love the animation, the direction they take with it, how it explains Tarlok, it explains Amon, it explains Yukon and gives Yukon really good insight as well, in that he's not just this villain of the past that Aang conquered. his legacy lived on and created the two villains from this book. And what happens in episode 12 makes it all the more tragic, especially knowing how Yukon basically at the same point created this massive non-bender movement, and then this, I suppose, massive pro-bender, anti-non-bender movement in a way that Tarlok ends up creating. And just the legacy of this one character, the legacy of this technique, it just is really, really incredible what they do with it. And this is why I always praise book one so much, because this plot is laid out so well across the book, of Tarlok in the early episodes mentioning the Yukon incident, you gradually seeing bits of the flashback through Korra's visions, and seeing that, bloodbending, just as Tarlok reveals he's a bloodbender, that connection is immediately made. And then Tarlok, after he's taken out, reveals that Amon's part of it, and here's how it all happened. Here's how Yukon got a family after the Avatar incident, and how his legacy lives on. Even though they did everything in their power to not continue with his legacy, to not take revenge in the way that he wanted them to, they still ended up doing that, and that's what makes it so tragic in the end. But yeah, that's the Skeletons of the Closet review. In the comments, what are your thoughts on the episode? Do you like it as much as I do? Do you think, like myself, the flashback is the core of this episode that makes it so good, and the rest of the episode, while still being good, is good, but it's not amazing compared to the sheer quality of the flashback? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.